And he would always tell Zeppelin, I'm leaving the band. I can't go back to America again. I can't do all that.
In the world of hard rock and heavy metal, Ritchie Blackmore stood as one of the most respected yet feared guitarists of his generation. The brilliant musician behind legendary bands Deep Purple and Rainbow was much more than just a talented player. He was a pioneering force who helped shape the sound of heavy metal through his powerful riffs and classical music influences. However, Blackmore was equally famous for being one of rock music's most difficult perfectionists, known for his fierce temper and incredibly high standards. He had little patience for guitarists he viewed as lacking in talent, being overly pretentious, or simply not worthy of sharing the stage with him. Behind his interest in medieval themes and dramatic stage performances was a classically trained musician who took guitar playing extremely seriously. For Blackmore, playing guitar was genuine artistry that demanded discipline, innovation, and real talent. He didn't simply disagree with certain approaches to playing guitar. He genuinely despised what he considered to be technical show-offs, musicians who sold out for commercial success, and players who he believed had abandoned everything he thought rock guitar should represent. The Hartford-born legend who created timeless classics had very strong and outspoken opinions about his fellow guitarists, and he never hesitated to share his harsh judgments. Steve Vai represented one of the most interesting conflicts in Blackmore's career, a clash between instinctive artistry and calculated perfection. Vai, known for his flawless technical ability and surgical precision in his elaborate compositions, apparently infuriated Blackmore. The Deep Purple guitarist saw Vai's approach as the complete mechanization of guitar playing, something that destroyed what Blackmore believed was rock music's essential humanity and emotional spontaneity. The tension reportedly started when Vai emerged from Frank Zappa's band as a guitar hero during the 1980s. According to reports from rock journalists, Blackmore told other musicians that Vai had transformed guitar playing into something like a computer program. He believed Vai was so fixated on technical perfection that he had forgotten music should have soul and danger, not just surgical precision. What troubled Blackmore most was Vai's clinical approach to rock guitar and performance. Blackmore had built his entire reputation on unpredictable, emotionally charged playing that could shift from beautiful to terrifying in mere seconds. Meanwhile, Vai was finding success with what Blackmore described as laboratory rock, perfectly executed compositions that prioritized technical achievement over genuine musical expression and emotional authenticity. For Blackmore, this represented everything wrong with where guitar playing was heading. Yngwie Malmsteen presented perhaps the most ironic conflict on this list. The Swedish neoclassical virtuoso claimed to have revolutionized guitar playing through Baroque-influenced compositions, yet he reportedly became one of Blackmore's most despised targets. This was particularly ironic because both guitarists shared classical influences and similar theatrical approaches to rock music. The animosity apparently began in the mid-1980s when Malmsteen burst onto the music scene, claiming to be the greatest guitarist who ever lived. According to rock journalists, Blackmore told session musicians that this Swedish guitarist thought he had invented classical guitar in rock music. Blackmore pointed out that he had been incorporating Bach into heavy music when Malmsteen was still learning basic songs, and furthermore, Blackmore believed Malmsteen was doing it incorrectly. What especially angered Blackmore was Malmsteen's approach to classical integration and his outrageous public statements. While Blackmore had spent years carefully and subtly weaving Renaissance and Baroque elements into rock compositions, Malmsteen was achieving fame with what Blackmore called academic exercises that showed off technique without understanding the emotional core that made classical music powerful in rock contexts. The rivalry represented Blackmore's contempt for what he saw as shallow musical knowledge combined with unbearable egotism. For Blackmore, Malmsteen represented a fundamental misunderstanding of how to properly blend classical music with rock. Kirk Hammett of Metallica represented what Blackmore saw as generational warfare that defined metal's evolution from classical influence to speed-obsessed aggression. Hammett, Metallica's lead guitarist and one of thrash metal's most recognizable faces, reportedly earned Blackmore's contempt for what the Deep Purple legend viewed as the destruction of everything he had created during heavy metal's foundational years. The dislike allegedly began when Metallica emerged as leaders of the thrash movement in the early 1980s. According to metal historians, Blackmore told industry insiders that Hammett and his speed metal colleagues had taken everything Deep Purple had built and turned it into musical chaos. They had replaced melody and dynamics with mindless aggression and called it evolution. What infuriated Blackmore was thrash metal's approach to heaviness and composition. While Blackmore had pioneered heavy metal through classically influenced arrangements, dynamic song structures, and sophisticated guitar work, Metallica was achieving massive success with what Blackmore described as punk rock played louder. It was aggressive speed that sacrificed musical sophistication for pure energy and volume. For Blackmore, this represented a fundamental regression in what heavy music could achieve artistically. Slash of Guns N' Roses represented what Blackmore saw as the ultimate confrontation between authentic artistry and manufactured rock stardom. The iconic top-hat-wearing guitarist reportedly became one of Blackmore's most despised targets through what Blackmore viewed as the triumph of image over substance during the 1980s rock explosion. According to rock journalists, Blackmore told colleagues that Slash thought wearing a top hat and sunglasses made him mysterious, but he was just another pretty boy playing blues rock and calling it dangerous. Blackmore believed real guitar mystique came from genuine artistry, not costume department nonsense.
What particularly bothered Blackmore was Slash's approach to guitar heroism and celebrity. While Blackmore had built his reputation through genuine innovation, classical influences, and unpredictable artistic vision, Slash was achieving superstar status with what Blackmore called carefully crafted image and accessible songwriting designed for maximum commercial appeal rather than artistic advancement. For Blackmore, Slash represented everything that was wrong with 80s rock music, where style mattered more than substance. Eddie Van Halen presented perhaps the most shocking rivalry in guitar innovation history. The Dutch-American virtuoso who revolutionized rock guitar with his explosive finger-tapping technique reportedly became Blackmore's most envied and resented competitor. Blackmore saw Van Halen's approach as the triumph of athletic showmanship over genuine musical artistry. The conflict allegedly began after Van Halen's groundbreaking debut album in 1978 transformed rock guitar expectations overnight. According to Guitar Magazine editors, Blackmore told session musicians that Eddie had turned guitar playing into a circus act. He had confused athletic ability with musical expression, and now every teenager thought showing off equaled artistry. What infuriated Blackmore was Van Halen's approach to innovation and performance. While Blackmore had spent years developing sophisticated classical rock fusion and dynamic compositions, Van Halen was achieving massive success with what Blackmore called musical gymnastics, technical wizardry that prioritized impressive fingerwork over genuine songwriting and emotional depth. The rivalry represented Blackmore's belief that Van Halen had corrupted guitar playing's artistic purpose. He reportedly saw Eddie as turning genuine innovation into entertainment spectacle, making technical achievement more important than musical beauty and compositional sophistication that defined truly great guitar artistry. For Blackmore, Van Halen's influence on young guitarists was particularly damaging because it encouraged technical showing off rather than musical development. Jeff Beck presented the most bitter professional rivalry. The innovative virtuoso, known for his experimental approach and technical mastery, reportedly became Blackmore's most personal enemy through decades of competition. Blackmore saw Beck's approach as arrogant dismissal of anyone he considered technically inferior. The animosity allegedly began during their overlapping time in the British blues scene of the 1960s. According to rock historians, Blackmore told fellow musicians that Beck thought his technique made him superior to everyone else, but he had forgotten that music was supposed to move people emotionally, not just impress them with finger exercises in experimental noise. What made this rivalry particularly bitter was their competing approaches to guitar innovation and musical leadership. While Blackmore was building his reputation through classical influences and dynamic heavy rock compositions, Beck was achieving acclaim with what Blackmore called highly technical experimental music that prioritized innovation over emotional connection and compositional strength. The feud reportedly continued for decades, with both guitarists taking subtle jabs at each other in interviews. Blackmore allegedly maintained that Beck had confused complexity with artistry, viewing Beck's experimental phase as a betrayal of rock guitar's essential power and emotional directness. Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin represented what many consider the ultimate British rock rivalry that defined an entire generation's approach to heavy music. Page, Led Zeppelin's mystical mastermind, reportedly became Blackmore's most bitter enemy through what Blackmore saw as shameless theft of credit for innovations that belonged to Deep Purple and other genuine heavy music pioneers. The feud allegedly began in the late 1960s when both guitarists were emerging as leaders of Britain's heavy rock movement. According to rock journalists, Blackmore told industry insiders that Page was a clever session player who had convinced everyone he invented heavy rock, but he was just playing blues louder and calling it innovation. Blackmore believed real heavy music required genuine composition and classical understanding, not stolen riffs and mystical posturing. What made Blackmore's dislike particularly intense was Page's approach to heavy music and public image. While Blackmore was genuinely pioneering classical rock fusion and sophisticated heavy compositions, Page was achieving massive success with what Blackmore called blues rock theater, elaborate, mystical imagery that disguised relatively simple musical approaches as profound artistic statements. The rivalry represented Blackmore's belief that Page had stolen credit for genuine innovations while building a career on what Blackmore allegedly called borrowed power and manufactured mystery. For Blackmore, Page's success was a betrayal of authentic heavy music development and classical rock fusion artistry. Eric Clapton held the top position as the guitarist who most angered Blackmore. This represented what Blackmore saw as the ultimate betrayal that shattered his faith in guitar heroism authenticity. Clapton, the blues purist once called God by his fans, reportedly became Blackmore's most hated guitarist through what Blackmore viewed as the ultimate fraud. Blackmore saw Clapton as a technically limited player who achieved legendary status through media manipulation and shameless copying of American blues without genuine innovation or classical advancement.
The hatred allegedly began in the mid-1960s British blues scene, where both guitarists were competing for recognition. According to music journalists, Blackmore told session musicians that Clapton played the same 3 blues licks slower than everyone else, and somehow the press called him a god. Blackmore believed real guitar artistry required classical knowledge, innovative composition, and genuine technical advancement, not just copying American blues players note for note. What made Blackmore's contempt particularly strong was the gap between Clapton's media image and his actual musical contributions. While Blackmore was incorporating classical elements and developing sophisticated rock compositions, Clapton was achieving superstar status with what Blackmore called blues museum curation, faithful reproduction of traditional American blues without adding any genuine innovation or advancing guitar artistry beyond simple repetition. For Blackmore, Clapton represented the ultimate failure of the music press and public to recognize genuine innovation and artistry. He saw Clapton as someone who had achieved legendary status not through pushing boundaries or developing new approaches, but through carefully reproducing existing styles and benefiting from effective media promotion. This conflict cut to the heart of what Blackmore believed about guitar playing and artistry. He felt that genuine guitar mastery required constant innovation, classical training, and the courage to push beyond established boundaries, rather than simply recreating what had already been done. These rivalries revealed much about Blackmore's philosophy toward music and guitar playing. He believed deeply in classical training, innovation, and emotional authenticity. He had little patience for what he saw as showmanship without substance, commercial success without artistic merit, or technical ability without genuine musical understanding. Whether these conflicts were as intense as reported or somewhat exaggerated over time, they demonstrated Blackmore's uncompromising standards and his passionate beliefs about what rock guitar should represent. His legacy remains not just in the groundbreaking music he created, but in his relentless pursuit of artistic excellence and his refusal to accept anything less than genuine innovation and emotional truth in guitar playing.